You never really know your children until you hand them a gift that costs you pieces of your soul. I spent 4 years turning a dilapidated barn into a sanctuary for my son, only to realize I was building a monument to a boy who no longer existed. My name is Martha. I am 64 years old, a widow for 7 years, and a retired interior designer. When my husband Arthur passed away, the silence in our upstate New York farmhouse became unbearable. I needed a project to keep my mind sharp and my hands busy. We had an old dairy barn on the back 5 acres of our property. It was structurally sound, but abandoned. I decided to transform it into a home for my son David and his wife Chloe. They lived in a cramped apartment in the city, always complaining about the rent and the lack of space for my young grandson Leo. I drew up the blueprints myself. I hired local contractors to handle the framing, plumbing, and electrical work, but I acted as the project manager. I was out there every morning at 7 with a thermos of coffee, overseeing every detail. I sourced reclaimed oak for the floors, custom milled cherry wood for the cabinets, and found a stunning piece of live-edge walnut for the kitchen island. It took 4 years of permits, weather delays, and writing checks from my personal savings. I poured my heart into that space. I imagined Leo running across those oak floors. I pictured family dinners around the kitchen island. When the final coat of paint dried, I stood in the center of the great room and smiled. It was breathtaking, warm, inviting, and built to last generations. I picked up my phone and invited David and Chloe to come up for the weekend. I had a surprise for them. They arrived on a crisp Saturday morning, completely unaware that their lives were about to change. Or so I thought. David parked his leased SUV near the farmhouse, and they walked toward the barn. Chloe wore a designer coat and a scowl, carefully avoiding the gravel path in her heels. I unlocked the heavy double doors and pushed them open, stepping aside to let the morning light flood the grand space. I expected gasps. I expected a hug. Instead, silence stretched across the room. Chloe walked in, her eyes darting over the hand-hewn exposed beams and the rich, amber-toned oak floors. She crossed her arms. David cleared his throat, glancing nervously at his wife. "Mom, it's big. Really clean." Chloe touched the custom cherry cabinets in the kitchen and sighed. "It's very rustic, Martha. Almost like a cabin. Are these appliances not hidden? We really prefer a sleek, integrated look." I watched her fingertips leave a smudge on the wood I had spent weeks selecting. "It's a converted barn, Chloe. The design respects the original architecture." David shoved his hands in his pockets. "Mom, look, I know you spent a lot of time on this. We appreciate the thought. Really. But it's just not my wife's style. We're a modern minimalist family." I stood perfectly still. 4 years of architectural planning, contractor meetings, and carefully curated materials dismissed in 30 seconds. Chloe turned toward me with a tight, practiced smile. "Honestly, Martha, what if you just sold this? The land value alone must be decent. You could give us the money to put a down payment on a luxury condo in the city, something that actually fits our aesthetic." David nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, exactly. A developer might pay good money for this plot. We could really use the cash for a place closer to my office." They were already spending the money. In their minds, my property, my grief project, my savings were just a bank account waiting to be drained. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just looked at the two of them and saw them clearly for the very first time. "We don't need to figure it all out today," David mumbled, misreading my silence for agreement. I simply nodded. I offered them lunch at the main house, but Chloe claimed she had a headache from the farm smell. They left less than an hour later, promising to text me some listings for city condos they liked. I walked back to the barn alone. I sat on one of the bar stools at the Walnut Island. The afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the floorboards. I thought about the thousands of dollars I had paid the contractors. I thought about the physical exhaustion of managing the build. But mostly, I thought about Chloe's entitlement and David's weak spine. He hadn't even looked me in the eye when he suggested selling my land to fund their lifestyle. I wasn't a victim. I had allowed this dynamic to fester by always accommodating them, always paying for dinners, always sending generous checks for Leo's birthdays. I had thought I was helping. I was actually just feeding a bottomless pit. I locked the barn doors, walked into my farmhouse, and brewed a pot of tea. My husband, Arthur, used to say that when people show you their true colors, you should believe them the first time. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of an old friend, a woman named Beverly, who had dominated the luxury real estate market in our county for 2 decades. Beverly answered on the second ring. "Martha, it's been a while. How is that barn project coming along?" "It's finished," I replied, taking a sip of my tea. "And I want you to come look at it. I think I'm ready to list it." Beverly paused. "List it? I thought you were building that for David." "Plans change," I stated plainly. "How soon can you get here?" I didn't send David a single text. I didn't review the condo links he eagerly emailed me later that evening. I simply went to sleep, feeling lighter than I had in years. Beverly arrived the following Tuesday. She wore her signature power suit, a stark contrast to my comfortable jeans and gardening sweater. We walked down to the barn together. As soon as I opened the doors, Beverly stopped in her tracks. She slowly walked through the great room, her eyes tracing the custom ironwork on the floating staircase and the seamless transition from the living area to the chef's kitchen. She ran her hand along the walnut island much like Chloe had done, but with genuine reverence. "Martha, you didn't just renovate a barn. You created a masterpiece." "I hired good contractors," I corrected her gently, "but the design is mine." Beverly spent an hour taking notes, checking the HVAC system, admiring the radiant floor heating I had installed in the master bath, and examining the smart home integrations. Finally, we sat down at the island. Beverly pulled out a pen. The market for unique high-end retreats is exploding right now. City buyers want a turnkey escape, with your finishes, the acreage, and the privacy. She tapped the pen against her notepad. "I wouldn't list this for a penny under $1.4 million. I didn't flinch. "Can we carve out the barn and 5 acres from my main farmhouse deed?" "Easily. I have a surveyor who can fast-track the division." Beverly answered, her eyes gleaming with professional excitement. "Are you sure you want to do this, Martha? It's a lot of money, but it's also a piece of your heart." "My heart is fine," I assured her, standing up. "Let's get the paperwork started. I want it on the market by Friday." Over the next few days, I quietly boxed up the few personal items I had staged in the barn. A rocking horse I had bought for Leo, some vintage quilts. I moved them back to my house. The trap was never set for David. He had simply walked out the door, and I was choosing to lock it behind him. Beverly wasn't exaggerating about the market. By Saturday afternoon, the listing had generated a massive wave of interest. The professional photos showcased the blend of rustic architecture and modern luxury perfectly. I stayed in my farmhouse during the showings, watching expensive cars roll down my long gravel driveway. I sipped my morning coffee from my porch, observing couples in designer clothes exploring the property. On Wednesday, Beverly called me practically breathless. "Martha, we have 3 offers. 2 are slightly under asking, but the third is from a boutique hospitality group. They specialize in high-end corporate retreats. They offered the full $1.4 million, all cash, a 30-day close." I smiled at the phone. "Accept it." They want to buy some of the staged furniture too, especially that walnut island and the cherry cabinets, obviously. "It all stays," I confirmed. "The house deserves people who appreciate the craftsmanship." Meanwhile, David was still texting me links to minimalist condos in the city. Mom, did you check out the penthouse unit I sent? We really need to move on this before the developer finds another buyer for the barn plot. I read the message and simply turned my phone on silent. I wasn't going to engage in a back-and-forth argument. Explaining my actions to someone who didn't respect me was a waste of breath. I met with the surveyor, signed the subdivision papers, and finalized the contract with the hospitality group. The process was smooth, professional, and entirely under my control. My name was the only one on the original deed. I answered to no one. As the closing date approached, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had turned my grief into something beautiful, and now I was turning that beauty into freedom. I just wondered how long it would take for my son to check the public real estate listings. The closing took place on a rainy Thursday morning at the title company's office downtown. It took less than an hour. I signed my name a dozen times, handed over the heavy iron keys to the hospitality group's representative, and walked out. By noon, the funds were wired into my account. $1.4 million. I drove straight to my local bank branch. I sat down with my financial advisor, a sensible man named Greg, who had managed Arthur's retirement accounts. I didn't want the money sitting idle, and I certainly didn't want it accessible. Martha, this is a significant deposit, Greg noted, looking at his screen with raised eyebrows. What are your goals? Security, I answered firmly. And a very specific trust fund. I kept enough in a high-yield savings account to comfortably cover my living expenses for the next 20 years. The rest I divided. I set up an irrevocable trust for my grandson Leo. It was locked down tight. He couldn't access it until he turned 25, and it could only be used for education or buying his first home. Most importantly, neither David nor Chloe had any administrative power over it. The remaining bulk of the money went into conservative index funds. I drove back to my farmhouse. The barn was officially no longer mine. The new owners were already moving in some additional furniture for their first corporate guests. I watched the delivery trucks from my kitchen window. I felt no regret. I opened my laptop and logged into my family cell phone plan. David and Chloe had been on my account for 5 years. I clicked Remove Lines, effectively cutting off their service at the end of the billing cycle. I did the same for the autopay on their car insurance, which I had temporarily covered since Leo was born. The financial umbilical cord was officially severed. I poured myself a glass of red wine and waited for the storm. The storm hit exactly 6 weeks after the barn went on the market. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter at 8 in the morning. It was David. I let it ring. He called again. And again. Finally, on the 4th try, I swiped to answer. "Hello, David," I greeted him calmly. "Did you sell the barn?" he shouted. The panic in his voice was palpable. "A guy from my office was looking for weekend rentals and showed me a listing. The barn is an executive retreat. Did you sell it?" "Yes, I did," I replied, wiping down the counter. "How much?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "$1.4 million. It closed a few weeks ago." Silence hung heavy on the line. I could hear Chloe in the background, her voice shrill and frantic, asking what was going on. David muttered something to her before returning to me. "Mom, how could you do that? We were going to use that money for our condo. You stole our future." "I sold my property, David. You told me it wasn't Chloe's style. That land was family inheritance." He exploded. "You had no right. Chloe has already been talking to real estate agents here. We are going to sue you, Mom. I mean it. I'll get a lawyer and sue you for my half of the estate." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tremble. I simply leaned against the counter. "David, listen to me very carefully." I instructed, my tone ice cold. Your father left everything to me. My name is the only name on the deed. You have zero legal claim to my assets while I am breathing. If you want to waste your money on a lawyer to tell you the same thing, go ahead. But do not ever threaten me again." Before he could stammer a reply, I ended the call. My hands weren't shaking. I felt nothing but absolute clarity. 2 hours later, the text messages started pouring in. They weren't from David. They were from Chloe. "Martha, I can't believe you would do this to your own family. We are struggling here. Leo needs his own room. How can you be so selfish? David is devastated. You manipulated us into rejecting the barn just so you could cash out. If you don't wire us at least half of that money by Friday, you will never see your grandson again." I read the messages and chuckled softly. The manipulation tactics were so transparent it was almost insulting. She thought the threat of withholding Leo would break me. Years ago, it might have. But I had already made my peace. I didn't type out a long defense. I didn't try to explain the 4 years of hard work or the disrespect they showed me standing in the middle of it. Instead, I replied with a single message. "Your phone service and car insurance auto-pay will end on the 30th. Please make alternative arrangements. Kiss Leo for me." Then I blocked her number. I blocked David's number too. I didn't do it out of malice. I did it because I refused to allow their toxicity into my home anymore. I was 64 years old. I had spent my life raising a son, burying a husband, and trying to keep everyone happy. It was time to maintain my own peace. I walked into the living room, picked up my gardening gloves, and went outside. The autumn air was crisp. I spent the afternoon pruning the rose bushes Arthur had planted decades ago. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of my son's expectations resting on my shoulders. I was just Martha. And that was enough. Months passed. The transition from autumn to winter was quiet and beautiful. The hospitality group running the barn was incredibly respectful. They kept the grounds immaculate, and occasionally a corporate guest would wander near the property line and wave to me. I never heard from any lawyer. David's threat of a lawsuit evaporated the moment he realized I wasn't bluffing, and probably after a free consultation, confirmed he had absolutely no case. Around Christmas, a handwritten card arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting belonged to David. I opened it at the kitchen table. It was short. He admitted he was struggling with the new bills since I cut off the phone and insurance. He asked if we could talk. He didn't apologize for his behavior, nor did he mention Chloe's threats. It was just a weak attempt to reopen the Bank of Mom. I didn't reply to the letter. Action requires genuine accountability, and he hadn't shown any. Instead, I reviewed the statements from Greg, my financial advisor. The trust fund I had set up for Leo was growing nicely. That brought me a deep, profound satisfaction. I loved my grandson, and I had ensured his future was protected. He would have his college paid for, or a solid down payment for a house when he turned 25. And the best part, David and Chloe would never be able to touch a single cent of it to fund their modern minimalist aesthetic. The money would bypass their greedy hands entirely and go straight to the boy. I placed David's card in a drawer. I wasn't closing the door on my son forever, but the toll to re-enter my life was respect, and he hadn't earned it yet. I put on my coat, grabbed my car keys, and drove into town to meet Beverly for lunch. I was paying. Spring arrived, bringing a vibrant burst of green to the upstate hills. It had been nearly 8 months since the sale of the barn. David finally showed up unannounced one Sunday afternoon. He parked his car, a cheaper sedan, this time not the least luxury SUV, and walked up to my porch. I was sitting in my favorite rocking chair reading a book. He stood at the bottom of the steps, looking exhausted. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, David." I greeted him, keeping my voice neutral. I didn't get up. He looked over toward the barn. A few well-dressed people were carrying yoga mats across the lawn. "Looks like they're doing well with it." He noted quietly. They are. They appreciate the craftsmanship. He nodded, shoving his hands in his pockets. Chloe and I had to downsize. The rent got too high. We moved further out into the suburbs. That sounds like a sensible financial decision, I replied calmly. He looked at me, searching for the mother who used to instantly offer her checkbook whenever he mentioned a struggle. He didn't find her. He found a woman with clear boundaries. I miss you, Mom. He admitted, his voice breaking slightly. I miss the boy I raised too, I answered. But as adults, we have to respect each other. You and your wife disrespected my home, my work, and my boundaries. Until that changes, this is how it has to be. He didn't argue. For the first time, he just accepted it. He asked if he could bring Leo over next weekend for an hour. I would like that, I agreed. Just Leo. And just you. He nodded, turned around, and drove away. I leaned back in my rocking chair and watched the sunset paint the sky in strokes of purple and gold. I didn't have the barn anymore, but I had something far more valuable. I had my peace, my dignity, and the rest of my life entirely under my own control. If there is one thing this entire experience taught me, it is that you cannot buy respect, and you shouldn't have to. For years, I thought that loving my family meant constantly smoothing out their paths and sacrificing my own comfort to fund their expectations. But true love doesn't require you to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. Sometimes the most empowering thing you can do, both for yourself and for your grown children, is to step back and let them face the reality of their own choices. Your hard work, your peace of mind, and your boundaries have value. Don't ever let anyone convince you that your worth is measured only by what you can give them financially. You are allowed to protect your own peace. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to draw a difficult but necessary line to protect your own well-being, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to join our community. We share real, grounded stories about navigating complex family dynamics, finding your inner strength, and learning to rebuild life on your own terms. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.